Welcome to Redeeming Missions, a podcast from Every Home for Christ about the complexity of Christian missions and evangelism in our time. We host conversations that will challenge us through unique global perspectives and honest stories. Redeeming Missions is a podcast for ministry leaders, passionate evangelists, and the rest of us who might be a little bit more cautious or even disenchanted with the topic. Together, we're on a journey to find the heart of what it means to carry Christ to our world. I'm your host, Tanner Peake, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. Well, welcome to another episode of the Redeeming Missions podcast. I'm so excited to have today with us a guest, Blake, who's a co-founder of a huge agency called Matchstic. I'm going to let him describe that here in a second. But really personal. There's a personal application to even this conversation today, in that this has been a partner of Every Home for Christ, has helped us actually just walk through this enormous process of rebranding and re-expressing who the ministry is. And so welcome, Blake. Thanks for making the effort to be on here.
Yeah, thanks, Tanner. Thanks for having me.
I think it's going to be a sweet conversation. So I say this every time, but one of my favorite parts of the podcast actually is the beginning here, where we get to hear story. I think story is such a I know you believe in this too. Story is such a powerful medium. And I think that a lot of our listeners really can relate. They find places that they can relate to story. And so we in our pre-game conversation, we told you, just tell as much of your story as you want, or what brought you to the place where you're at. And maybe in the process, you could explain a little bit of Matchstic and how your journey brought you to Matchstic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All right.
Yeah. So I grew up on a corn farm in Middle Tennessee, which is a fun fact. My dad was not a farmer. However, he did own a farm, which meant he employed people to, do whatever little farming needed to be. But it was a great place to grow up, very remote, very rural. And then eventually moved to Nashville. So I mostly grew up in Nashville. That's my stomping ground, what I claim. And I always loved drawing. Drawing was like my secret skill, I guess you could say. It was like my thing. But my dad was a businessman, and he was like in the finance world, and he didn't quite know what to do with a son who felt like an artist,
Wow.
And he actually helped me find graphic design as we were kind of like processing that together. He found Communication Arts magazine, and one thing led to another, found out about graphic design, thought, oh, you can draw but use computers. Like, that's amazing. And went to school, studied graphic design. And then right out of college, I had an opportunity to I went to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and had a chance to move to Atlanta to work for a family friend who was managing bands. And I thought, man,
yes, like music bands.
Yeah, band. Yeah, music band.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I had an internship at Sony Music doing design, and so I thought, hey, this is cool. This would be great. And this is back like CD packaging days. So
yeah, like where the lyrics are in the inside and like the dedication.
Yeah. That was my internship, basically, is taking all of the Dixie Chicks liner notes and making sure they were like typographically perfect. So yeah,
wow. Well, I didn't know that about you. That's an awesome fact. That's an awesome part of your story.
Yeah, I mean there were highlights also with that internship. Like, got to work on a Johnny Cash CD and like cool things. But there were also some non-cool things, and typesetting was one of those. So the idea of moving to Atlanta, working with his family friend, doing graphic design in the music industry was like, this is great. So I went and I interned and freelanced. And while I was there, I met Craig, who's my business partner now. He was managing bands. So he was on the talent management side, and him and I worked together on several projects. And this was 2002. And so the music industry was in shambles. It was not a great time to say, hey, let's get into the music industry. It was like iTunes downloads just came out. The Napster wave had sort of, crashed and broken the business
Napster
model. And
yeah, that's a throwback right there.
Yeah. Yes. And so as I was doing freelance graphic design for this company, Craig, who I was working closely with, just said like, "Hey, what if I managed your freelance graphic design business?" I was like, "Hey, that sounds great." I'm 22, right out of college. And he's like, "What? I'll do all the non-creative stuff. You do all the creative stuff. I'll do all the non." I'm like, this is perfect. So we did that for several months. Really enjoyed working together, and then eventually just said like, "Hey, what if this is a company? What if we just start this together?" And so we went 50-50 on the beginning of that. And that was the beginning of Matchstic. And, at first we just did graphic design for anybody and everybody. We would work in the music industry. We did a lot of like festivals and a lot of like CD packaging. And then, we would do anything and everything. So if you needed a website, like, hey, we got you. You need a billboard, we got you. And that led all the way towards 2008, which was a significant year. The Great Recession had started to really, become a reality. And we were just like a graphic design business. There were 8 of us on staff at that time. And we were just like having fun. Like we just had a ball all the time. And we didn't have a lot of focus as a business or a lot of discipline. We were really young, just trying to figure it out. And the Great Recession all of a sudden helped us realize, whoa, we're going to have to get serious about this. Like there's work to be had out there, but we're going to have to really get focused and develop an expertise in order to compete. And so that's essentially what we did. We thought there's a great Jim Collins book, Good to Great.
Yeah.
And we read that as a team. There was this one exercise that was like, where are you profitable? Where do you add value? And where is there the most opportunity that's, not sort of taken? And we said like that, let's do that exercise. And every time we would have that discussion as a team, we kept going back to like the idea of logo design, of the process that we would help lead clients through just to get a good creative brief. One thing I always, probably better than my design skills, I was a little bit better at like having good discussions up front to say like, okay, what are you really trying to accomplish here? What do you really need the design to do for your business? And we would get good feedback on like the exercises and the workshops that we would do. So it was like that plus the logo design work that we did seemed to give all of us the most energy and fuel. And we were like, hey, what if we started to focus on branding? And we Googled designing brand identity. Like we literally just Googled that. And we found this book that was titled Designing Brand Identity. So we bought it and we all read it. And in the back was the author's information. And so we just sent her an email. And her name, she recently passed away. Her name's Alina Wheeler. And we sent her an email. And we just said, "Dear Alina, we read your book. We loved it. Would you come to Atlanta and have breakfast with us?" And like complete favor, she just said yes. She came down. She ended up being a mentor for us and an advisor for our business. And she just poured into us like so graciously, so selflessly, just for some reason poured into us. And so from that point forward, we just started to develop that focus and that expertise around brand identity. And, that essentially fast tracks to where we are today. So I would say just like quick recap, I grew up on a corn farm, which is kind of an unexpected place to then get into art and design. And then also sort of just took one right step after the next. And all of a sudden, 20 years later, I'm a business owner, so it's kind of like interesting happenstance, but also just like, I would say divine guidance along the way. And, yeah.
Your story is actually awesome. I mean, we've been working together, or we worked together for like a year. And a lot of times those are like real professional conversations that we're having. And I didn't know a lot about that, of your story. I think it's really amazing. And just even the metamorphosis, or the way that you grew into what you're doing today. I think one thing that sticks out about your story, and I can attest to this from my side, is that you're really excellent at asking questions, of helping people. I would say actually helping people discern. I would say, I mean, you probably don't see yourself as that, but I mean, that's a spiritual act in a way of like helping people reconnect to their heart, and reconnect to their why and their what and say it in a beautiful way. And so I would be curious, or I think maybe our audience would be curious, what does that look like to you as you've grown kind of into the place now where Matchstic is helping numerous organizations, some of them Christian, some of them not, certainly not exclusively a Christian organization. How has that grown? How is that asking questions, helping people discern? How has that grown in what you do?
Yeah, we do have a value of being curious as a company. So I think that is really important to us. And we will often get positive feedback from clients that say that, like, oh man, you guys just ask good questions.
True.
And I do think that comes from years of expertise. We know when you're really focused and you do the same thing over and over and over, you become really good at knowing what question to ask and when to ask it. I think that for us, we're invited into organizations to help fix a problem. Usually it's around, hey, we need a new message, or hey, we've got this new vision and we don't feel like we necessarily represent that in the market right now. Can you help us? And the first way to get up to speed and to just learn as much as possible is ask a lot of questions,
Mm-hmm.
And the information that we learn in asking those questions, that all becomes the input and the fodder that we collect, and then we rearrange those elements and we present that back in a more optimized story, So we very rarely are completely throwing something out and saying, no, you said you're every home. You said that you're about, helping local Christ carriers. No way. That you're about actually building wells. You know what? It's fresh water.
Yeah.
Like the gospel needs to go like fresh water out into the world. So we don't, we say that we help organizations find the gold sometime that's buried within.
Yes.
And we bring that to the surface, and then we just help sort of polish that and present it back to the market in a place that makes more sense. So I think the questions is the most important part of collecting that information and that data. And we ask questions, to leadership like yourself, to staff, to donors, to other partners, because we want to get a well-rounded perspective of answers to those questions, not just one person's answers to those questions. Because at the end of the day, brand is a reputation that's out there in the market. That's this macro idea, this feeling that you have that's built off of all these micro touch points. So all of those little interactions, they add up to this bigger idea. And so sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's negative. And in order for us to have a good grasp on what that reputation is, we have to ask a lot of people. And we have to ask a lot of questions in order to get that.
I mean, that's you're so articulate, Blake. I mean, that is like such an articulate answer to that question. I would say from our experience, just a little context maybe to our listeners, we just initiated, or we had about a little bit over a year ago, initiated a process with Matchstic. And I like how you said it. We were looking for the gold of every home for Christ. And we wanted to understand, we've grown as a ministry. We're a missions organization that has this passion to carry Christ to the world. But we felt like we needed an outside entity to come in and discern along with us what exactly was the goal. And in that process, what you're talking about curiosity and asking questions. I don't know the actual number off the top of my head, but I would say like a couple thousand people at some level. Maybe that's too much, but a high number of individuals you ask questions about. I mean, you looked for gold all over the place, from our office here to our international ministry around the world. And so I just, as some context for our listener, this has been incredibly applicable. And I think, Blake is a unique guest on this podcast because of what you do is so out of the traditional norm of what people might think of when they think of missions. But actually, just personally, the way you've ministered to us, whether you knew it or not, you've actually done us this huge favor and help us communicate who we are. One of the things that intrigued me initially when we were kind of getting to know each other was this idea of radically relevant. And this is like the lingua franca of Matchstic in a way. Could you break that down a little bit of just the way that you have conceptualized this idea of radically relevant and how it interfaces with an organization like Every Home for Christ?
Yeah. So a little context, maybe connected back to just my personal story, and then also just the story of Matchstick. In 2018, 2019, we had continued to grow in the brand world and had worked on some significant projects, had, some industry awareness for our work, and felt like we were doing great. And we had started to compete with bigger global agencies. And as you do that, as you start to kind of compete at a higher level, you quickly learn that you can't go into like a pitch or a new opportunity and just say like, hey, you know what? A brand is this, and you can't really lead with like basic brand 101 stuff. You have to bring a unique point of view. So we started the process of saying, okay, what is it that we really believe? There's so much jargon out there when it comes to brand. What is it that we think is most valuable? What is it that we think is most true about how we help clients? And so going through that process, we realized that it really comes down to two questions. One, a brand needs to define like, what is it that is your unique contribution to the world? So what is it that you tangibly do that no one else really does that is just most unique? And then secondly, what is it that your audience needs? Because at the end of the day, the brand is not for you. It's for your audience. It's the way that your audience perceives you. It's not how you perceive your organization. So that second question is, what is it that your audience really wants or needs? And where those two answers overlap, where you're really differentiated and where you're really valuable, that's where you start to tell the story for a brand. And we call that being radically relevant. So radically differentiated from a competitive set and relevant to who your audience is. And you have to do both of those things. And brand gives you the opportunity to maximize that story so that you're delivering on both things. So you're not just relevant and saying the things that you think your audience wants, because chances are most other competitors are saying those exact same things. And you also can't just be different to be different's sake. You have to add value at the same time.
That's
so
right.
it's both and.
That's amazing. That's been for us, again, the gold. Look, as we've looked for the gold within, Every Home for Christ is this global entity that's in 165 nations now. And as we've just to look for the gold, how do we communicate our gold really to our audience, which can be partners around the world. It could be the church. And we have lots of different kind of stakeholders. And so you've really helped us in that process.
Are you ready to jumpstart a purposeful prayer life? Every Home is inviting all believers to join us in praying for the whole world for 31 days during the month of May. By spending just 2 minutes a day, you can begin to see the world from God's perspective and experience what He is doing in the lives and hearts in every nation. Get started today by ordering a free World Prayer Map and signing up for daily prayer alerts in your inbox at everyhome.org/pray daily.
Our audience that's listening to this is super diverse. We have about 90% of our audience is in the US, but about 10% is global. And I'm aware that they might be listening to this and they're going, what on earth? This is super interesting. This is incredible. That's how I would be. This is incredible, but why does this matter? Why does this matter to me? Like, why does this matter to me? I'm a small business owner, or, maybe I'm a stay-at-home mom, or I'm a rancher in Montana or something like that. Or it could be, in our case, this could be a ministry in Eswatini or somewhere around the world. If you were going to explain to that group of people, why does brand matter? You've been kind of saying this, but I want to get right to the point where our audience, like right where they're at. How would you explain to them, why does your brand even matter? What is the purpose of your brand at all?
Yeah. Well, there's levels to that, to answer the question. And if you think for an organization,
Right.
small or large, it is about awareness of what it is that you offer, and it's about consideration. And you would just want your audience to be aware of what you do, and then also that they would consider you as the preferred choice, right? Like that's just sort of the marketplace forces.
Right.
I think on an individual level, I think it's kind of interesting and kind of double clicks down. A lot of what we do, you could one for one apply on an individual level. In fact, I've taken
I was just going to ask you that. Could you do this at an individual basis? Could you self-brand, or at the most micro level, could you brand?
Yeah, completely. So my wife and I go through, we used to call it the Core 4. And there were like these 4 questions that we would lead clients to consider, to think about in the brand strategy process that we applied to our marriage. And it was like a 1-for-1 connection, because at the end of the day, what you're doing in branding is you're defining the organization's identity. What is it that we stand for? What do we really care about? How do we add value to the world? Who matters most? And you take those exact questions on a personal level, like what is it that's unique about us? Who matters most? How do we add value to the world? And it's a 1-for-1, So the Core 4 has been super helpful for my wife and I, and we led a small group for a while, and we were like, hey, we do this like thing every year, and here's a worksheet, you guys might like it. And I got an email a couple weeks ago from someone that was in that small group 10 years ago. And they're like, hey, do you have that Core 4 PDF? I've got this thing, and like, I just think it'd be so great. And I think the process of just, asking yourself really good questions that articulates what is most important. What is it that God has really called you to do? And having clarity and not losing sight of that, and not also just saying, what has he called me to do? How do I really add value to the world? Like, what is it that he has uniquely gifted me with to add value to the world? And the hardest one, who matters most? Because everybody matters, right? Like that's a difficult question. Shouldn't everybody matter? But on an individual level, it's okay to have a hierarchy. It's okay to say right now who matters most to us is our kids, or right now who matters most to us are our parents that are aging, or right now who matters most to us are our neighbors, because we just moved into this new neighborhood and we want to build community, and we want to connect with them. So yeah, I think there's a complete 1-for-1 around corporate identity, corporate brand strategy, and just having good life planning and trying to get at the heart of your own individual identity.
Hey, so for a second, can we act like we're in your small group? And I think you just did this. I think you actually just repeated this, but maybe you can, or maybe I'm asking you to repeat it. But imagine me and all of our audience all around the world is in your small group. What would those 4 questions be? I think you just kind of riffed your way through them, but maybe in like the most clear way. So I think this is so relevant, Blake. I wasn't anticipating talking about this, but I think this is where our audience actually is at. I mean, I think it's young. I mean, most of our audience is also millennial. And so they're just trying to find their way home. They're trying to figure out how to order their life. There might be, young families. Act like for a second you're our small group leader. And if you can remember, maybe you can't remember those 4 questions, but whatever you remember of the 4 questions literally.
Yeah. I have the PDF on my desktop still.
Yes.
Because I reference it quite a bit. So the first question is, what are your core convictions? So what that means is deep down inside, what do you believe to be true? What do you believe to be most right in the world? What issues, topics, causes, people groups, etc. Like, do you feel like the Lord has put on your heart? Like, what are those core convictions? Secondly, what makes you different? So what unique skills, gifts, talents, or personality traits has the Lord given you? And what is it that only you can do? So, I think even as I've articulated or thought through my own story, the design and art side becomes really important to me in terms of my context where I grew up, and it was just different. But then also, the way I try to lead and gather people and spark groups getting together, or to sort of collect different groups and instigate new things all the time. So what makes you different is the second question. The third question is the audience one. Who matters most right now? What people or groups of people should you be investing into? Who is your priority? And then lastly, and this is a good one. I had forgotten about this when I was riffing just a few minutes ago. What rhythms and disciplines do you need to commit to?
Ooh, that one hurts. You're right. That's a good question.
So based on those first three, you should have, a lot of like really good information at that point if you've answered those three. And the fourth is, how do you start to put action to it? So like, what activities do you need to plan for and add to your calendar to ensure you're living out your convictions and your differences and investing time with those that matter most? So that could be, daily rhythms, monthly rhythms, quarterly rhythms, reminders in your calendar. I used to do a planning day every quarter where I would block my calendar, and in the morning I would reflect back on some of these questions. I would look back through my journal, pray, and then say like, okay, like, God, where are you calling me now in this season in light of where I've been? And then I would start to just like, write stuff down. And then I would literally jump over to my calendar and start planning other things. So yeah, that fourth question it's a doozy.
I love that. I think that's so practical. Like I'm thinking, as you're going through those questions, I was quickly trying to figure out how would I answer that. And so I think it's something that it would be good to prayerfully reflect on, maybe pull away from your day to day and ask those questions, and ask them in your family context as well. I can see there being multiple applications, doing that for yourself as an individual, but also potentially as a family. I can see that being relevant. Is that true? Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah. I haven't done it with my kids yet, so I should. I think as a family, that would be incredible to cultivate the culture and the identity of the family. We've done some things kind of like this as a family, but I have 3 kids, 10, 8, 6, and they're just now getting to a point where we can have more than a 5-minute conversation that feels intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old, and I enjoy the fact that we can have these more even philosophical conversations. So I get that from my my life application. I don't know if you're familiar with Eugene Peterson. I mean, he's the guy who, for maybe our audience wouldn't know, but he's the guy who developed the Message translation of the Bible. It's a paraphrase, but I've just been reading his life story. There's a well-known book about his life, and he's just a unique guy. Part of the reason I'm reading it because we're both Montana boys. He came from Montana. I came from Montana. So there's a little bit, I feel like I'm pretty much probably related to him. Montana's small enough, probably not, but it's fun to think about. Anyway, but his, I think the one thing that stood out to me about his life, and he has this really diverse life, was the word congruency. In fact, his son said, my dad only really had one message. It's the only message he ever preached, and he would just preach it different ways, and it was congruency. And so I've been really reflecting on that, of how do we live fully into the person that we were designed and made to be? I mean, there's something of divine purpose. I mean, God puts things in our hearts and our lives, call it whatever you want, but there's something in our soul that is intended to have this external reflection, or this it's to be externalized in a certain way. The other person I was just reading this morning is a guy named Parker Palmer. He's a Quaker, and he wrote a book called The Hidden Wholeness, and he talks about the same thing in terms of integrity. How do we live integrous from the inside out? That our insides and our outsides would be the same. And so it just strikes me as you're talking. This is like the theme. This is where I've been churning, or this has been frothing around in my ADHD brain, this idea of congruency. And those questions are so practical. They seem just so relevant. Anything else that you would say on those the questions? You're our small group leader still.
I think that, they are very, very practical, and in my experience, most people can answer them pretty quickly, but maybe they haven't just taking a minute to breathe and to reflect on those questions and to put them on paper. And that process can be very liberating.
Yeah.
To all of a sudden say, okay, maybe I do have some focus. Maybe I do have permission to say no to some things now, and to put more focus into play. And that's another fun overlap in my mind, is that in the brand process for organizations, it's all about focus. It's about articulating the narrative for that organization, which requires a plot that requires a very focused identity. And the same thing is true with individuals. You do need to focus the narrative of who you think you are and the plot, so to speak. And once you speak that, you really start living it. And so the process of just having some simple questions and defining them, I think, can be a very liberating experience that some people don't really make the time to do. But once they do, they're like, wow, it can be a game changer. Like you could really start to move forward in power and confidence when you just take a minute to define who it is that you really are and who God's calling you to be.
Yeah, I like that you talk about kind of examining your story, just going back into your story, identifying the plot, because I think a lot of those questions are answered a lot of times in your story. They've been true. They might have been true since you were a child. I mean, I love your story, actually, how you're talking about being, living on a corn farm, and really this, like, the uniqueness of your life and that earthy, that kind of earthy experience of growing up and being an artist. And now, like, look at what you're doing now. I mean, you can see the continuity in your story from being young to old. And so I think even as my small group leader right now, I hear you saying that examine your story and identify the plots, and that actually could lead you to understanding how to even answer those questions. If you're a little bit lost, go back into your story and examine it a little bit. And I would also say, because I don't want to just get stuck on the individual side, that's exactly what you've done with us at this corporate level. Allowed us to, you asked us some hard questions about our story, and really, more or less, those 4 questions are in the most simple sense is what we just went through for a year. And we did it with this 165 nations. So I think for the other part of our audience who might be leaders, and they're going, how I can't afford to work with an outside firm. I can't do that. But are there practices that I could do with my team that would help me come to this kind of clarity and conviction? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the whole Radically Relevant framework is designed for people to understand the performance of their brand. So at the organizational level, our brand is this reputation that's out in the marketplace. Is it helping or hurting? And sometimes you don't know. That's hard to grasp. And so the Radically Relevant model allows you to start to understand that. And I did write a book called Radically Relevant. You can find it on Amazon. That has
on Amazon. I want to say that strong. You guys, I've read this book. It's so good. So go on Amazon, Radically Relevant. We'll put it in the show notes as well. Sorry, Perfect. I had to interrupt you there.
Yeah, no, thanks for the shout out. So there's an assessment in there that you can take. You can actually take the assessment for free without buying the book, radicallyrelevantbrand.com. And it takes about 10 minutes, and that assessment will help you identify where your brand is really performing well and where it's not. And so an analogy I like to use is that brand is a lot like the wind. It's like it's intangible. You can't quite see it, but you can feel it. And I grew up flying with my dad. My dad had his private pilot's license, which was phenomenal. Such a gift. And, there were times where we would fly to Arkansas to go fishing on the White River, and we would have this incredible tailwind, and we would get there in like 30, 45 minutes. Other times we would have this horrific headwind. And we were like barely afloat. You're looking down on the interstate and you're seeing semi trucks going faster than you. And you're like, oh my goodness. And it would take us 2 or 3 hours. And brand is like that. The performance of a brand is like that. It's either a headwind and it's slowing you down and it's getting the way of your mission, or it's a tailwind and it's propelling you forward and it's everything's in alignment and you just feel like things are easier and faster and smoother and you're more successful. And it's hard to know sometimes, are we a headwind or a tailwind in terms of the brand? And so the assessment helps you start to articulate that and to really pinpoint the areas that maybe are slowing you down, that's the headwind, and then the areas that are the bright spots that are that tailwind propelling you forward. So I encourage people to get the book, to take that assessment, and then there's a lot of practical advice also after the assessment, wherever you land, that gives you very actionable tips, exactly how to start to maybe improve and get more of that tailwind for your organization.
That's awesome. So that's so practical. What would be your website? I mean, we'll put it in the show notes, but for the person who's too lazy to go to show notes and they're just wanting to do this, what would that website be?
It's radicallyrelevantbrand.com.
Oh, that's easy. Radicallyrelevantbrand.com. That's incredible. Okay. I want to keep us going. Otherwise I'll just sit here and chat your ear off. The last question that we always ask on this podcast, we've done this 20 times, I don't know how many times, is this question of carry Christ. What does carry Christ mean to you? And just for your context, I stole this terminology from Mother Teresa, actually. I was reading a Time magazine about Mother Teresa's life, and she had this, exactly what you're talking about. She had this vision statement for herself. And in summary, it was something like to carry Christ to the most marginalized of society. And that word carry Christ, man, it just hit me. I love the imagery of it. I admittedly stole this from Mother Teresa. Sorry, Mother Teresa.
It's probably a good place to repurpose from, you know?
Yeah. So when I say that to you, what does carry Christ mean to you?
What's funny about this is that phrase is not unfamiliar to me because of our work together.
Yeah, that's right.
And in helping you and the rest of the leadership at Every Home reimagine the Every Home brand, carry Christ is like the thing. Like we talked about it all the time. But I never once said, what does that mean to me? Uh-huh. So switching it has been interesting. And I think there's maybe two levels the way that I see it. One is, on a personal level, every single day, life throws difficult situations or circumstances at you. Like the Lord never promised that life would be easy. He just promised he'd be with us. Mm-hmm. And that is true. There are things this week that have happened that have been really hard with my family. And carrying Christ is the ability to still find peace in all of that, to still navigate hard circumstances and say, like, you're my anchor, God. Like, I can't figure this out. I'm not in control. And I'm so thankful that you are and that you're good. And I'm just going to trust that you're working through this. And that's hard. It's super hard. And, I can't rationalize that you're in control or that you know me, but yet I'm still just going to trust. And I'm going to carry like what I have learned the character of Jesus is, and to carry the Holy Spirit with me in all that I interact with. And I just hope that helps me navigate these hard situations, So that's the first thought on a personal level. And then the second one is maybe more difficult for me to articulate on a professional level, because as you mentioned, we're a creative agency that works with all kinds of clients. Mm-hmm. We have a very diverse team in terms of personal beliefs and perspectives. So, anytime we work with a Christian nonprofit like Every Home, I slightly hold my breath because I want my team to have a positive experience with an organization that maybe they agree with or don't agree with, or maybe have a negative bias going into, that they're going to be treated a certain way or judged. And I hold my breath hoping that organization lives out the example of Jesus to them in that sort of professional dynamic. And in a similar way, I just want to serve my team and I want to serve clients. And I don't view it as my job to tell them about Jesus. I view it as my job to serve them and to help them grow in their career on a team level. And for clients, I view it as my job to be honest, to be their guide through the process, to tell them what I see as, watch outs or the truth, and to love them through my expertise. And then I'm just going to trust that God will do the rest, So I think on a professional level, it's more difficult to articulate, but I just want to be different. I just want to serve people well. And sometimes I do that in an okay way. Sometimes I completely fail at it. But the idea of carrying Christ is just to go and to love and to serve and to be excellent at what I do and try to help people either on my team or the clients that we're privileged to work with. That's
such a beautiful answer. And I like the multifaceted aspect of what you're bringing to it. Even professionally, I think it's a good, there's just good insight into both of those. I want to say a couple of things. We're closing down here, but I want to say a couple of things to somebody who's listening, especially leaders or leaders of organizations, I guess, is just how much it's meant to work with an organization like Matchstic. And I couldn't sing your praises more highly. And I want to give a wholehearted endorsement of Matchstic because they really have your whole team, not just you, Blake, but your whole team has been integral in actually helping us discern, really answer those 4 questions or identify where what radically relevant looks like for us as a huge missions organization. And so I think in a sense, you and your team, whether they were, all Christian or not, you've carried Christ to us in a certain way. I know that might be controversial, but there's something of the goodness of God that's been displayed through Matchstic. And so I want to just say, if someone's looking for further clarity or maybe you're head of a church or you're head of a nonprofit or you're just head of a secular, you're running a company, Matchstic has been such a special blessing. And so I didn't want to get to the end of this podcast without saying that. I mean, for a year we worked together so close. And I'm even, I was just showing you at the beginning, we've developed some beautiful branding as a ministry. It's going to launch here actually in a public sense at the beginning of May. So I don't know quite when this podcast is coming out, but the beginning of May. So if people want to see how Matchstic is benefited an organization like us, go on our website, www.everyhome.org. You can see actually the handiwork of Matchstic. So Blake, I really genuinely thank you for this conversation. It's been beautiful.
Thanks, Tanner. Yeah. And hey, to follow back on what I said about holding my breath, working with Christian organizations, your team was amazing. And our team loved the process and felt just a great professionalism, but also a great trust and great respect. And that's not always what you feel with a client. And so thank you for being a really great example of how to carry Christ as well and to how to be a good client.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. That makes me proud. I hope that's the case. I hope we're being a good reflection. But thank you for your time, Blake. Thanks for jumping on here with me. I hope this conversation is just as exciting to our audience as it is to me.
Thanks for having me.
But dude, good pod. Blake is awesome.
So awesome.
We worked with him this whole past year for this rebrand. I mean, you're gonna hear it. You can hear it in the podcast. But it was cool. I actually always wondered. I'm like, where's Blake at? Because he's just bright and just good. It's like, wondering where his relationship with Christ was at. Hearing his story, so cool. What stood out to you, man?
Man, that was actually one of my favorite podcasts. I didn't quite know what to expect. I mean, talking to somebody in his profession is a little bit different. But I think what, just really stuck out to me was just the invitation to live a congruent life.
Yeah.
And just the practicality that he brought. Like those 4 questions, I literally
We
joined
Blake's small group.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, after we got done after the call, and I was like, hey, can you send me that PDF with those 4 questions? So I think for the average person, I think that's actually really practical.
Yeah.
It's corporate. I mean, branding is corporate, but there's a personal application that I think is just so pertinent to anybody who'd be listening to this, whether you're a mom, and you just feel isolated at home, or you live in, internationally, and you're just trying to get by and you're trying to discern what's in your life. So it made me excited. I actually think it was one of the more practical podcasts that we've done.
So true. I think even in just light of people, what we've talked about in a dozen different ways on the podcast, of people participating in mission, knowing who they are, knowing their story, living out of it authentically, you said, with congruency, and it's all about beauty and goodness. That's what I love about Blake. It's like whoever I'm serving, my team, a client, it's discovering beauty. I mean, the way he defined carrying Christ, just I can't get over that question. Such a good question, and love the many ways we've heard it. So it's a good conversation, man.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Missions podcast. If you like what you heard, we encourage you to visit everyhome.org/redeeming missions to find all past episodes and learn more about Every Home and joining the efforts to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. Echoing in the prayer of St. Patrick, Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us. Let us carry Christ to our world. Until next time.